cannot ignore this. Please ignore the thing that has been said to it, really. It's just a little toy. I love toys. So let's begin with part 2 of The Tale of Mr. Todd. Let's go and read it together, guys. Wall besides the kitchen fireplace, a little iron door belonged to a brick oven of that old-fashioned sorts that used to be heated with fagots of wood. And presently, at the same moment, Peter and Benjamin noticed that whenever they shook the window, the little door opposite shook in answer. The young family were alive, shut up in the oven. Benjamin was so excited that it was a mercy he did not awake Tommy Brock, whose snores continued solemnly in Mr. Todd's bed. But there really was not very much comfort in the discovery. Although he could not open the window, and although the young family was alive, the little rabbits are quite incapable of letting themselves out. They're not old enough to crawl. So we're just really young. Okay, really young it is. Wait me. After much whispering, Peter and Benjamin decided to dig a tunnel. They began to burrow a yard or two lower down the bank. They hoped that they might be able to work between the large stones under the house. The kitchen floor was so dirty that it was impossible to say whenever it was made of earth or flags. A kitchen floor made of earth or flag? Earth is kind of like soil or dirt, and flags, you know it. They dug and dug for hours. They could not tunnel straight on account of stones. But by the end of the night, they were under the kitchen floor. Benjamin was on his back, scratching upwards. Peter's claws were worn down. He was outside the tunnel, shuffling sand away. He called out that it was the morning sunrise and that the jays were making a noise down below in the woods. Okay, I'm sick of these classes. Benjamin Bunny came out of a dark tunnel, shaking the sand from his ears. He cleaned his face with his paws. Every minute the sun shone warmer on the top of a hill. In the valley there was a sea of white mist. White mist? What is that? With golden tops of trees showing through. Again from the field down below the mist there came an angry cry of a jay, followed by sharp yelping bark of a fox. Then those two rabbits lost their head completely. They did the most foolish thing that they could have done. They rushed into the short new tunnel, and hid themselves at top end of it, and Mr. Todd's kitchen floor. Mr. Todd was coming up Bull Banks, and he was in the very worst of tempers. First, he had been upset by breaking the plate. It was his own fault, but it was a china plate. the last of the dinner service that had belonged to his grandmother, old Vixen Todd. Then the midges had been very bad, and he failed to catch a hen pheasant on her nest, and it had contained only 5 eggs. 2 of them added. Mr. Todd had an unsatisfactory night. What does that word even mean? As usual, when out of humor, he determined to move house. First, he tried the polar willow, but it was damp, and the otters had left a dead fish near it. Mr. Todd likes nobody's leaving but his own. He made his way up the hill. His temper was not improved by noticing unmistakable marks of badger. No one else grubs up the moss so wantonly as Tommy Brock. Okay, I need a softy table. Mr. Todd slapped his stick upon the earth and thumped. He guessed where Tommy Brock had gone to. He was further annoyed by the jaybird, which followed him persistently. It flew from tree to tree and scolded, warning every rabbit within hearing and either a cat or a fox was coming up the plantation. Once it flew screaming over his head. Mr. Todd snapped at it and barked. He approached his house very carefully with a large rusty key. He sniffed and his whiskers bristled. The house was locked up, but Mr. Todd had his doubts wherever it was empty. He turned his rusty keys in the lock. The rabbits below could hear it. Mr. Todd opened the door cautiously and went in. The sights that met Mr. Todd's eyes in Mr. Todd's kitchen made Mr. Todd furious. There was Mr. Todd's chair, and Mr. Todd's pie dish, and his knife and fork and mustard and salt cellar, and his tablecloth that he had left folded up in the dresser, all set out for supper or breakfast. Without doubt or that obvious Tommy Brock. At here I see a lot of Mr. Todd. There was a smell of fresh earth and dirty badger, which unfortunately all powdered a smell of rabbit. But what absorbed Mr. Todd's attention, a noise, a deep, slow, regular snoring, a grunting noise, coming from his own bed. He peeped through the hinges of a half-open bedroom door, and then he turned and came out of the house in a hurry. His whisker bristled, and his coat collar stood on end with rage. For the next 20 minutes, Mr. Todd kept creeping cautiously into the house and retreating hurriedly out again. By degrees, he ventured further in, right into the bedroom. When he was outside the house, he scratched up the earth with fury. But when he was inside, he not liked the look of Tommy Brock's teeth. He was lying on his back from his mouth open, grinning from ear to ear. He snored peacefully and regularly, but one eye was not perfectly shut. Mr. Todd came in and out of the bedroom. Twice he brought in his walking stick, and once he brought in a coal scuttle, but he thought better of it and took them away. When he came back after removing the coal scuttle, Tommy Brook was lying a little more sideways, but he seemed even sounder asleep. He was an incurably indolent person. He had not in the least afraid of Mr. Todd. He was simply too lazy and comfortable to move. Mr. Todd came back yet again into the bedroom with a clothesline. He stood in a minute watching Tommy Brock and listening attentively to the snores. Were very loud indeed, but seemed quite natural. Mr. Todd turned his back towards the bed and undid the window. It creaked. He turned around with a jump. Tommy Brock, who had opened one eye, shut it hastily, and snores continued. Mr. Todd's proceedings were peculiar and rather uneasy, because the bed was between the window and the window of the bedroom. He opened the window a little way and pushed out the greater part of the clothesline onto the windowsill. The rest of the line with a hook at the end remained in his hand. Tommy Brock snored conscientiously. Mr. Todd stood and looked at him for a minute. Then he left the room again. Tommy Brock opened both eyes and looked at the rope and grinned. There was a noise outside the window. Tommy Brock shut eyes in a hurry. Mr. Todd has gone out at the front door and round to the back of the house. On the way, he stumbled over a rabbit burrow. If he had any idea who was inside it, he would have pulled him out quickly. His foot went through the tunnel nearly upon the top of Peter Rabbit and Benjamin, but fortunately he thought that it was some more of Tommy Brock's work. He took off a coil of line from the sail, listened for a moment, and then tied the rope to a tree. Tommy Brock watched him with one eye through the window. He was puzzled. Mr. Todd fetched a large, heavily pailful of water from the spring and staggered with it through the kitchen to his bedroom. Tommy Brock snored industriously with a snort. Mr. Todd put down the pail beside the bed, took up the end of the rope with a hook. He stayed and looked at Tommy Brock. The snores were almost apoplectic, but the grin was not quite so big. Mr. Todd gingerly mounted a chair by the head of the bedstead. His legs were dangerously near to Tommy Brock's teeth. He reached up and put the end of the rope with a hook over the head of a tester bed where the curtains out to hang. And this here. You see it? Mr. Todd's curtains were folded up and put away. Owing to the house being unoccupied, so was the counterpane. Tommy Brock was covered with a blanket only. Mr. Todd, standing on the unsteady chair, looking down upon him, attentively. He really was a first-prize sound sleeper. It seemed as though nothing would waken him, not even the flapping robe across the bed. Mr. Todd descended safely from a chair and endeavored to get up again with a pail of water. He intended to hang it from a hook dangling over the head of Tommy Brook in order to make short of a shower bath, whereby a string through the window. But naturally, being thin-legged person, though vindictive and sandy-whiskered, he was quite unable to lift the heavy weight of the level of a hook and rope. He very nearly overbalanced himself. The snores became more and more apoplectic. One of Tommy Brock's hind legs twitched under the blanket, but still he slept on peacefully. Mr. Todd and the pail descended from the chair without accident. After considerable, though, he emptied the water into a wash basin and jug. The empty pail was not too heavy for him. He slung it out wobbling over the head of Tommy Brock. Surely there never such a sleeper. Mr. Todd got up and down and up on the chair. As he could not lift a whole pailful of water at once, he fetched a milk jug and ladled quarts of the water into the pail by degrees. The pail got fuller and fuller and swung like a pendulum. Occasionally a drop splashed over, but still Tommy Brock snored regularly and never moved, except in one eye. And here's how he's done. Here it is. At last, Mr. Todd's preparations were complete. The pail full of water, the rope was tightly strained over the top of the bed and across the windowsill to the tree outside. It will make a great mess in my bedroom, but I can never sleep in that bed again without a spring cleaning of some sort, said Mr. Todd. Mr. Todd took a last look at the badger and softly left the room. He went out of the house, shutting the front door, and the rabbit heard his footsteps over the tunnel. He ran round behind the house, intending to undo the rope in order to let fall the pailful of water upon Tommy Brock. I will wake him up in an unpleasant surprise, said Mr. Todd. The moment he had gone, Tommy Brock got up in a hurry and rolled Mr. Todd's dressing gown in a bundle, put it into a bed beneath a pail of water instead of himself, and left the room also, grinning immensely. He went into the kitchen, lighted the fire, and boiled the kettle. For the moment, he did not trouble himself to cook the baby rabbits. When Mr. Todd got to the tree, he found that weight and strain had dragged by the knot so tight that was in the past untying. He was obliged to gnaw it with his teeth. He chewed and gnawed for more than 20 minutes. At last the rope gave away in such a sudden jerk that it nearly pulled his teeth out and quite knocked him over backwards. Inside the house was a great crash and splash. and the noise of a pail rolling over and over, but no screams. Mr. Todd was mystified. He sat quite still and listened attentively. Then he peeped in at the window. The water was dripping from the bed, the pail had rolled into a corner. In the middle of the bed, under the blanket, there was a wet, flattened something much digged in the middle where the pail had caught it, as it were across the tummy. Its head was covered by the wet blanket, and it was not snoring any longer. There was nothing stirring, and no sound escaped but drip, drop, drop, drip of water trickling from the mattress. Mr. Todd watched for half an hour. His eyes glinted. Then he cut a caper and became so bold that he even taped at the window. But the bundle never moved. Yes, there's no doubt about it. It had turned out even better than he planned. The pail had hit poor old Tommy Brook and killed him dead. I buried that nasty person in the hole which was he dug. I am bringing my bedding out and drying it in the sun, said Mr. Todd. I washed the tablecloth and spread it on the grass in the sun to bleach, and the blanket must be hung up in the wind, and the bed must be thoroughly disinfected and aired with a warming pan and warmed with a hot water bottle. I will get soft soap and monkey soap and all sort of soap and soda and scrubbing brushes and person powder, cyan powder and carbolic to remove the smell. I must have a disinfecting. Perhaps I may have to burn sulfur. He hurried down the house to get a shovel from the kitchen. First I will arrange the hole. Then I will drag out that person in the blanket. He opened the door. Tommy Brock was sitting at Mr. Todd's kitchen table, pouring out tea from Mr. Todd's teapot into Mr. Todd's teacup. He was quite dry himself and grinning, and he threw the cup of saline tea all over Mr. Todd. Then Mr. Todd rushed upon Tommy Brock, and Tommy Brock grappled with Mr. Todd amongst the broken crockery, and there was a terrific battle all over the kitchen. To the rabbits underneath, it sounded as if the floor would give away at each crashing of falling furniture. They crept out of their tunnel and hung about amongst the rocks and bushes, listening anxiously. Inside the house the racket was fearful. The rabbit babies in the oven woke up trembling. Perhaps it was unfortunate that they shut up inside. Everything was upset except the kitchen table, and everything was broken except the mantelpiece and the kitchen fender. The crockery was smashed into atoms. The chairs were broken, and the window and the clock fell with a crash, and there were handfuls of Mr. Todd's sandy whiskers. The vases fell off the mantelpiece, and the cassiners fell off the shelf. The kettle fell off the hob. Mr. Tommy Brock put his foot in a jar of raspberry jam, and the boiling water out of the kettle fell upon the tail of Mr. Todd. And here's how it looked. A big mess. When the kettle fell, Tommy Brook, who was still grinning, happened to the uppermost, and he rolled Mr. Todd over and over like a log out of a door. Then his sneering and worrying went on outside, and they rolled over the bank and downhill, bumping over the rocks. There will never be any love lost between Tommy Brock and Mr. Todd. As soon as the coast was clear, Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny came out of the bushes. Now for it! Run in, Cousin Benjamin! Run in and get them! Why watch at the door? But Benjamin was frightened. Oh, we're coming back! No, we're not. Yes, we are. What dreadful bad language! I think they have fallen down the stone quarry. Still Benjamin hesitated, and Peter kept pushing him. Be quick, it's all right. Shut the oven door. Cousin Benjamin, so that he wouldn't miss them. Decidedly, there were living doings in Mr. Todd's kitchen. At home in the rabbit hole, things had not been quite comfortable. After quarreling at supper, Flopsy and old Mr. Bouncer had passed a sleepless night and quarreled again at breakfast. Old Mr. Bouncer could no longer deny that he had invited company into the rabbit hole, but he refused to reply to the question and reproach of Flopsy. The day passed heavily. Old Mr. Bouncer, very sulky, was huddled in a corner, barricaded with a chair. Flopsy had taken away his pipe and hidden the tobacco. He had been having a complete turn-out and spring cleaning to relieve her feelings. She had just finished. Old Mr. Bouncer, behind his chair, was wondering anxiously what she would do next. In Mr. Todd's kitchen, amongst the wreckage, Benjamin Bunny picked his way to the oven nervously through a thick cloud of dust. He opened the oven door, felt inside, and found something warm and wriggling. He lifted it out carefully and rejoined Peter Rabbit. I've got them! Can we get away? Shall we hide, Cousin Peter? Peter pricked his ears. Distant sounds of fighting still echoed in the wood. 5 minutes reward 2 breath. Less rabbits came scuttering away down bullbanks, half carrying half dragging a sack between them. Bumpety-bump over the grass. They reached home safely and burst into the rabbit hole. Great was old Mr. Bouncer's relief and Flopsy's joy when Peter and Benjamin arrived in triumph with a young family. The rabbit babies were rather tumbled and very hungry. They were fed and put to bed. They soon recovered. A long new pipe and a fresh supply of rabbit tobacco was present to Mr. Bouncer. He was rather upon his dignity, but he was accepted. Old Mr. Bouncer was forgiven, and they all had dinner. Then Peter and Benjamin told their story, but they had not waited long enough to able to tell the end of the battle between Tommy Brook and Mr. Todd. The end. So it was end this. You know I'm stressed when I'm doing something long and sit down and wait and sit and doesn't do anything. I'm feeling so tired of my muscles, so I need to stretch. I kind of feeling like I'm making me shorter. Bye guys. See you in the next video. Please like and subscribe. 拜拜。